Hello, and welcome to today's Safety and Health webcast, Demystifying Arc-Rated and Flame-Resistant Apparel Claims, sponsored by Ergodyne. My name is Kyle Morrison. I'm the Senior Associate Editor with Safety and Health magazine, and I'll be moderating today's session. Thank you for joining us. We'll start the presentation in a few minutes, but first I'd like to go over some housekeeping items. The views of the speaker and her organization are her own and do not necessarily reflect those of the National Safety Council or Safety and Health magazine. Mention of any commercial enterprise, product, or publication does not mean that the Council or the magazine endorse them. At the end of today's webinar, we'll have a question and answer session. To ask a question, simply type in the text box located in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, then click the Submit Question button. Feel free to ask your question at any point during the presentation. You don't need to wait for the Q&A session to begin to ask your question. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can, but due to the large number of participants today, we may not get to all of the questions. However, all unanswered questions will be forwarded on to today's speaker. For basic troubleshooting information, please click the Help button located on your screen. At the end of the webcast, you'll be asked to complete an evaluation survey, and I'll talk a little bit more about that after the presentation. This webcast will be archived for 3 months, so you can access it after today's live presentation. Within about a day, just return to this URL to return to the webcast. With that, I think we're ready to begin. Our speaker today is Angela Pitch, Ergodyne's product manager of the Element Pillar. Angela has more than 15 years of product management and development experience and is knowledgeable on FR labeling and PPE, industry hazards, and regulations and standards. Angela?
Great. Thank you so much, Kyle. I appreciate that introduction. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I know you are all very busy, so I do appreciate you taking time to join this webinar. This FRIAR training session will help to give clarity to some of the mystifying topics that come about when dealing with FR and AR apparel. This webinar will be mainly directed to those in the U.S. We will detail out some of the Canadian and European standards, but that will not be the focus for today's session. If you happen to have specific questions regarding Canada and Europe, please submit your questions and we will address those via email after the session. So let's take a look at the agenda. During the session, we will cover the following topics: the difference between an arc flash and a flash fire, the risks associated with each flash fire, along with who might be at risk for such hazards. I will give an introduction to the regulations and standards associated with those hazards, review the different types of labeling that should be found in FRIAR apparel. We will go through how to properly care for flame-resistant and arc-rated apparel. And finally, we will end with how to determine what apparel might be best and appropriate for your team. As a note, during the session, I will refer to flame-resistant apparel as FR and arc-rated apparel as AR. Let's start by understanding the difference between the two different fire hazards. So what is a flash fire? A flash fire is a sudden ignition that is short in duration, only lasting about 3 seconds. A flash fire spreads rapidly as it is fueled by a mixture of air and a flammable material such as a gas vapor, dust, or other flammable material. In order for a flash fire to occur, you need 3 components: air and oxygen, the flammable material itself, and then lastly, an ignition source. Who and what are at risk for a flash fire? Again, as I mentioned, a flash fire is a hazard where 3 concentrated fuels are present in an area, and when mixed with air, can support an ignition. There are several risk factors associated with a flash fire, and a few of those risks are forms of concentrated fuels: solid flammables, which include but are not limited to sulfur, nitrate, or phosphorus; gas vapors, which could be in the air, which again might include gasoline, paint thinner, alcohol, and then even dust. Some examples of dust particles that can cause combustion are wood, sugar, flour coal, and even dried blood found in slaughterhouses. These many risk factors can be found in several industries across the U.S., such as and globally, such as agriculture, petrochemical plants, mining, manufacturing, and all aspects of oil and gas industry, refineries, pipelines, etc. Flash fires happen when three components are present: air, oxygen, the flammable element, and then an ignition source. The ignition source could come from a flame, a spark, even a fire ember of some sort. On the contrary, a flash fire that is caused due to combustible dust particles, that needs 5 components present: air, oxygen, the combustible dust particle, again, possibly coming from wood or flour, corn, just to name a few. The ignition source, again, that flame, that spark, or that ember. Diffusion of dust, which could happen as easily as a forklift moving about and churning up that dust that may be in a specific area. And then finally, the confinement of all those materials together, which could then cause a flash fire or a combustible dust explosion. Flash fires are commonly less than an arc flash, but oftentimes much more deadly. A combustible dust explosion can take down part of a building, if not the entire building. So again, can be completely catastrophic. What is an arc flash? An arc flash, similar to a flash fire, is short in duration, averaging about 1 second, but can be extremely devastating. An arc flash is a release of energy that yields light and heat from an original arc energy source. An arc flash can produce extreme heat in excess of 30,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Along with that extreme heat, an arc flash typically yields extreme sound, which can cause ear damage or even loss of hearing. And it can also disperse debris, again causing even further injury. An arc flash is a real issue, with 5 to 10 explosions happening every day here in the U.S. As I mentioned, an arc flash can be devastating as it brings along a vigorous force and extreme heat. The risks associated with a flash fire could be equipment failure and or power failure, equipment corrosion, so rust on a tool, something that's not perfect. Therefore, it is extremely important for employers to ensure their employees' tools and equipment are in good working condition. Personnel failure can also cause an arc flash, and then also lastly, a falling object could happen and cause an arc flash. So again, it's very important for employers to ensure their employees have all their necessary tools secured properly to avoid falling objects. As many of these risks could easily occur in an environment, it's so important to make sure that your employees are outfitted with the proper ARC apparel. Both hazards are very real and can happen on almost any job site. As you can see from this 2013 statistic from the U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics, 148 workers were killed due to fire and explosion, and another 139 were killed due to exposure to electricity. Therefore, making your employees properly equipped with the proper PPE is essential for their protection while on the job site. We already said that FRIAR clothing is required in industries where flash fires or arc flash fires can occur, and OSHA will and does fine those who fail to comply. So what regulations or standards should you be paying attention to? Federal OSHA replaces responsibility on the employer for all aspects of workplace safety with the general duty clause. This means that an employer must know what hazards exist in their workplace and put the proper controls in place to protect their workers. In the Code for Federal Regulations, there are 2 sections that very broadly mention FR clothing. Section 269, clothing for employees exposed to arc flash or flash fire hazards. Clothing cannot add to injury, prohibits acetate, nylon, poly, and rayon. An employee can wear wool, silk, or cotton base layer, but better yet, be more protected with FR base layer apparel and or mid-layer for that added protection. Section 132, general requirement for employers to identify hazards and provide appropriate PPE. While OSHA does not mandate compliance with any standard, nationally recognized consensus standards from organizations like NFPA, which is the National Fire Protection Agency, and ASTM, which is American Society for Testing and Materials, are used as evidence of best practices being followed in considering general duty clause citations. Many of you may or may not be aware, but OSHA has recently made several updates to 1910-269. There have been many changes, but the most important changes with regards to PPE are as follows. Employers must understand the hazards their employees face, and the easiest way to confirm and identify all hazards is to conduct a hazard risk assessment. There are organizations that can be contracted to come into your organization to assess your hazards. Employers are no longer able to make judgment calls. Prior to this change, employers were able to judge and assess their own environments and provide PPE as to their judgment. However, that is no longer acceptable. An employer must now assess for open fire, exposure to molten metal, and volt exposure. If these hazards are presented and or if an employee could be exposed to 600 volts or higher, then the proper PPE must be provided. In addition, employers now must calculate the incident energy level. If greater than 2 cals per centimeter square, the employer must provide the appropriate PPE. An employer must provide ARC-rated apparel greater than the incident energy level of their environment. For example, if an incident energy level is 8, then the apparel that would be worn must be 8 or greater. If your assessment shows you need a cal rating of 12, however, you cannot find an apparel item that meets that need, you may have to think about properly layering FR products together to be compliant. For an employer to be compliant, they must have the proper PPE from head to toe. In addition to having proper PPE from head to toe, man-made fibers such as nylons and polyesters are no longer acceptable under FR and AR clothing. Only all natural fibers such as 100% cotton, 100% wool, and 100% silks or FR base layers are allowed. Prior to this change, many employees had the correct outer layer tops. However, their underclothing or bottoms were not FR. Now FR bottoms, outerwear, headwear, and or gloves may be required for your particular environment. Again, with this change, employers must provide PPE from head to toe. Some other changes to 1910 that will not be discussed today are lockout, tagout procedures, minimum approach distance, and debriefing, to name a few. Therefore, if those details are needed and you need to learn about those, you could review the document in its entirety for those details. Just to make you aware, there are some important dates for this regulation. 3/1, so March 1st, was the date that risk assessments were to have been completed. And August 31st, all employees must be in the appropriate PPE. Yes, 8/31 is the correct date. There was an organization that negotiated an extension from 4/1 to 8/1. So if you are not yet compliant, you still have time to get your employees in the proper PPE to become compliant. After having had a risk assessment, the employer will have a clear understanding of what hazard exposures their employees face. With that said, the above are the standards that the employers should pay most close attention to. So let's take a look at each standard a little bit more in its detail. ASTM F1506. First, ASTM stands for American Society for Testing and Material. This is the standard performance specification for textile material for wearing apparel used by electrical workers. And what that means is that the fabric used to make the garment has been tested and received an ARC rating or an ATPV value, which is an ARC thermal performance value, per that ASTM F1959 standard. NFPA 70E or CSA Z462, again, just to make sure everyone was aware, NFPA stands for National Fire Protection Agency, and CSA stands for Canadian Standards Association. NFPA 70E are the standards for electrical safety in the workplace. These standards have been set to help employers ensure a safe workplace for their employees. The CSA Z462 is the Canadian equivalent to NFPA 70E. NESC, which stands for National Electric Safety Code, the NESC is the standard for proper installation and maintenance for electrical and communication utility fields, industries that are not specified by NFPA 70E. The NESC, that's a tongueful, is published by the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers. So that is not published by NFPA. NFPA 2112 is a standard for flame-resistant garment protection for those that are exposed to flash fires. So again, similar to ASTM F1506, this standard ensures that the apparel manufacturers meet standards for those who need FR for the flash fire hazards. NFPA 2113 is the standard that details out how to select, care, wash, and maintain garments that are manufactured to protect against flash fires. CGSB 155.20 is the Canadian standard for protection against hydrocarbon flash fires. EN ISO 1612 is the European standard for protective clothing against heat and flame. EN 1149 is the standard for the design requirements for anti-static PPE. So as this list is very long, please feel free to ask any questions regarding any of these standards or regulations, as it's a lot to absorb. Labeling. Now let's talk labeling. It may sound very basic, but actually it's very important when considering FR apparel. As with all FR apparel, FR and AR apparel requires a content and country of origin label. However, with AR apparel and FR, the manufacturer's name and address, the garment's model number, along with the size, also must be included on a label. Manufacturing care instructions, again, similar to clothing that you would purchase from a store, FR and AR must have the proper care instructions. This actually is extremely important for FR and AR clothing, as improperly laundering could compromise the integrity of the garment. We will review the proper way to launder FR and AR garments in some upcoming slides. It is also important to locate the certification testing label. This label confirms that the components that make up the garment, so that includes anything from a zipper to a snap to any type of draw cord that may be on that garment, that has been tested, that component itself has been tested, and then the finished garment itself has been tested by a certified lab. UL is an example of a certified lab and is one that Ergodyne uses. This label also confirms that an ATPV rating that that particular garment should meet. There are other certifiable labs, so just make sure that the apparel you choose is certified by a reputable laboratory. If you cannot locate such a label, you may want to select another garment for your employees. You should also locate the flame-resistant warning label, as this too is another important label. This label confirms what testing standards the garment has been tested to and performs to. Lastly, it is also advantageous to locate a manufacturing date code. This label can trace the garment through its fabric and its production state. You can see from the label here on the screen, there can be different layouts. So note that some labels may be combined in a different fashion as they are detailed here, or they could be separate. But just make sure that any product that you are interested in, if it's FR and AR, that all those details are somewhere represented on a label. Labeling. What can be expected from exterior labels? All apparel should be clearly identified as FR and AR apparel so that safety personnel can clearly identify who is and who is not in FR apparel. As many of you know or may not know, NFPA 70E recently changed their language with regards to HRC, or hazard risk categories. The HRC language is no longer used and will be replaced with PPE, or personal protective equipment. The categories have not changed with the exception of Category 0. Category 0 has been removed from the category details altogether. Otherwise, all details remain the same. For example, what was a hazard risk category of 2, meaning 8 cals to 24 cals, will remain the same in the PPE category table. The one difference that has not been clearly defined is how manufacturers should or will be labeling their garments. Therefore, you could see different ways of labeling garments in the near future. Some manufacturers will change to CAT, which is short for category. This is how we at Ergodyne have decided to move forward with marking our products. However, others may call out the actual CAL rating of that particular garment, or they may label their garments as AR1, AR2, etc. One point to note, this change will be evolving, so those garments that are already out there in the workplace with HRC notations, those will be grandfathered in, so no need to redress your workers. The apparel that they have will be just fine. So you may see different types of labeling for a while yet. Lastly, many manufacturers who will also add their own branding along with the fabric mills branding. In the FR and AR marketplace, the fabric branding plays a major role. Therefore, many manufacturers also include the mills branding both internally or externally on their garments. Care and maintenance is vital to maximizing the life of an FR garment and ensuring the FR protection is top-notch. First, I would like to point out that with the update to 1910, OSHA does support home laundering. However, it is important to understand that it is the responsibility of the employer to properly educate employees on how to properly care for their garments. Moreover, it is the responsibility of the employer to inspect all apparel. So making sure there are no holes in the garments, making sure that there are no ripped seams. You have the ability to mend them, making sure that all mending is done correctly. If it needs to have FR thread, whatnot, just making sure that the employer knows that they have to properly mend or they have to replace the apparel when needed. Let's just give you a rundown of the list of home laundering dues. First and foremost, follow the manufacturer's washing instructions. They are typically printed on a garment, and they also may come along with any hang tags that may be on the garment. Encourage your employees to ask questions about how to launder a garment that you provide to ensure the proper care. Wash FR clothing separate from all home laundering to avoid transferring of contaminants or non-FR fibers onto that FR garment. Make sure that your employees understand that they use liquid or dry detergent that do not contain bleach. Also, dry the garments on low heat and or air dry. Launder the garments when they become visibly contaminated with any grease, oil, fluids, petroleum products, paint, or chemicals. Again, it's very important to follow the manufacturer's wash instructions that are printed on the garment's labels. That's probably your one biggest takeaway. Home laundering don'ts. On the flip side, of the list of to-dos, we have, of course, don'ts. Don't use fabric softener on FR products. As we all know, softener does not actually soften the fabric, but rather it adds a thin chemical coating to the fabric, making it feel softer. That coating can act as a fuel and interfere with the AR/FR properties. Obviously, that kind of also coincides with fabric softener sheets, so we don't want those to be used for the same reasons We don't want fabric softener used in detergent form. Again, it acts as a fuel. Don't use bleach on FR products. That can destroy the fabric integrity, like it can, destroy your own apparel at home. Don't wear garments that are grossly contaminated by oils, paints, solvents, or chemicals that leave combustible residue on a fabric. Also, DEET, that has a fueling agent, so again, please don't apply that. And then lastly, any other direct chemicals, which might include spray starch. Again, those are kind of a long list of do's and don'ts, so if you have any questions with regards to maintenance in-home laundering or on-site premise laundering, please feel free to submit those questions and we will be happy to answer those. Although OSHA does support home laundering, there are other options. The first option would be a traditional industrial laundry program, which is where a laundry service will provide you with apparel from their assortment and then service the apparel on a weekly basis. With this program, you have no upfront cost. You simply pay a weekly fee. Another option, which you may or may not be aware of, is a program where you partner with an industrial laundry organization through a program called NOG, which stands for Not Our Goods. The difference between an NOG program versus a traditional IL program is that the employer pays for all the goods up front and then will work with the laundry to service the goods, wash and mend as needed. This type of program can be very beneficial for an employer as it allows the employer to purchase any FR or AR apparel to their choosing and then choose to have the laundry wash and mend. The employer only pays for the washing and mending as needed. This is very similar to how you would take your own dry cleaning to the dry cleaner. There is no 3 to 5 year contract, and then you do not pay for underwash, which means you are paying only for the product that you turn in, and then you may be benefiting from not having to wash so much product. So again, you could save money here with this program. So how do you select the proper apparel for your employees? Let's begin by understanding the two different types of apparel. Flame-resistant apparel resists flame ignition and self-extinguishes. Arc-rated apparel also resists flame ignition and self-extinguishes, but we can take it one step further because arc-rated garments have been tested and a rating has been applied to that garment. It is very important to make sure your team is wearing the right garments. Why? Because FR and AR clothing makes an incident survivable by limiting body burn injuries to less than 50%. In looking at the chart on the screen, you can see that if a person has less than 50% body burn, that would be the orange on the chart, no matter what their age, their survival rate almost doubles. This is because FR and AR clothing is made to self-extinguish the flame and provide a barrier insulating the wearer from some of the radiant heat and helping to limit their injury. FR/AR apparel does not guarantee that a worker will walk away unharmed from an incident. It merely provides a worker with precious escape time from an ignition source, which greatly increases their chance for survival if caught in a flash fire or arc flash. So how do you go about determining what is the right apparel for your employees? The best way to determine what is the right apparel is to follow these four simple steps. The first step is complete a hazard risk assessment, which, as previously advised, is now a requirement per the new OSHA mandate. The hazard risk assessment will help you to identify the hazards your employees may be up against. Step 2, understand the protection needed for your environment. Once your risk assessment has been finalized, you should be clear on what hazards you and your team may face and the incident energy level that you need to protect your workers against. For example, the CAL rating, if your CAL rating is 8 or 12, you will need to have the appropriate apparel for that. If you cannot find something, you can always layer up. You may need to layer up to reach a specific CAL rating for your hazard. When layering up your garments, know that you cannot simply add up the CAL ratings, but rather you need to test the garments together to obtain an accurate CAL rating for those combined garments. Air gaps between two garments can impact the overall CAL rating, which is why testing two garments together is necessary. Many of the apparel manufacturers will be able to tell you how their products layer up and what rating they achieve as a layering system. For example, if the manufacturer has a base layer and a sweatshirt, they may have the testing results that calculate how those two garments add up as a system. The third step would be to review all your options. There are many manufacturers that partner with different mills that produce FR fabrics, which lead to many different garment options. Whether the material is engineered at the fiber level, which means it would be an inherent blend, or a fabric level, which would be a treated cotton, the flame-resistant properties are guaranteed for the life of the garment and cannot be washed out, provided that your employees launder and follow all laundering procedures. Again, make sure you know your fabric options, as you and your team may have a personal fabric preference, which may lead in your decision making. Again, when reviewing options, make sure to review the product labeling. Make sure that all the details I laid out in the earlier slides are clearly detailed on the labels that are sewn into the garments that you are interested in, to make sure that all appropriate fabric and apparel standards have been met. You want to make sure that the fabric and garments meet your satisfaction and that your employees are properly protected. Last but not least, it is important to engage with your employees. If you can gain an understanding of what is important to your employees, you can work, again, to narrow down your options. Be sure to remember that your employees are more likely to stay compliant if they are happy with the apparel that has been provided to them. Does the garment have a nice soft hand, or is it something scratchy? Is it lightweight and therefore more cooler and more comfortable? As a reminder, with the changes to OSHA 1910, short sleeves are no longer okay. Moreover, that means that an employee cannot roll up their sleeves. All shirts must be tucked in and buttoned to the top. Therefore, you should consider what is more comfortable: a woven shirt buttoned to the top of the collar, or a soft knit crew shirt, or a soft knit Henley buttoned to the top. Moreover, if your employees are in a coverall, they must zip the coverall all the way to the top, unless they are wearing FR underneath their coverall. An employee is able to wear cotton, silk, or wool under a coverall. However, if it is unzipped for comfort, then that employee is no longer compliant. And lastly, if the outerwear has the ability to break open, then the underlayer must be ARC rated appropriately. Also, the fit is very important to consider. A looser fitting FR garment, the looser the fitting the FR garment, the more thermal protection the clothing system will provide. Air is a very effective insulator. Therefore, maintaining an air gap between the clothing and the skin will reduce the rate of heat transferred and provide better protection. With that said, a loose fit must be balanced against the hazards of clothing being caught in moving equipment. As you can see, it is essential to engage with your employees so that they stay happy, comfortable, and compliant. Again, FR/AR clothing limits injuries. It self-extinguishes the flame, thus limiting the burn. Most severe burn injuries and fatalities are caused by non-flame resistant clothing ignition and continue to burn. Body area under non-FR clothing is often burned more severely than exposed skin because of this point. It provides a barrier from the flames, insulating the wearer from some of the heat. It also provides the wearer with precious escape time from an ignition source, which will greatly increase their chance of survival if the wearer is caught in a flash fire or arc flash. FR/AR clothing keeps an employer compliant. FR clothing is required in industries where a flash fire can occur, and AR clothing is required in industries where an arc flash can occur. The responsibility lies with the employer. It is their responsibility to conduct a hazard risk assessment to determine what PPE is appropriate. Not complying with the laws can leave a company open to fines from OSHA and litigation from other resources. FR and AR clothing saves an employer money. The cost of an entire FR and AR clothing program will pale in comparison to any medical or legal costs an employer incurs because of severe burn injury. With 5 to 10 arc flash accidents occurring every day in the U.S., this is a dangerous hazard that can definitely happen. And when an arc flash incident occurs, no matter how insignificant, it will result in significant costs to an employer. The average cost of medical treatment for an arc flash is $1.5 million. It's also costly to have lost work days. Workers can be out from 8 to 12 months after an incident. And of course, there's the possibility of a worker death or permanent disability, which can cost $10 to $15 million per litigation. Everyone should look at FR clothing as their insurance policy. Bottom line is that accidents will happen, and wearing non-FR clothing actually results in more serious injuries. Implementing an FR or AR program includes better workplace safety, will reduce work injury, save the employer money, and keep them compliant. So implement an FR or AR program today. Now that you know the basics, understand how to determine what product would be best for your employees, understand the label and how to care for product, and you know what standards to pay attention. How do you go about creating an FR program? Simply follow a few steps. Again, perform the hazard risk assessment to determine what hazards exist in your environment. Select the proper PPE to address those hazards, and finally, you can conduct a wearer trial. Select a small group of employees to wear the apparel that you are considering, and they can provide you with feedback on the comfort and fit. We here at Ergodyne are always able to help out, so please feel free to contact us with your PPE selection and wearer trials. To participate in a wearer trial, please just simply visit our website. And with that, we can move to questions.
Great. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, Angela. Before we start the Q&A, I want to remind everyone of the evaluation survey I mentioned at the top of the hour. The survey should be appearing on your screen now, and we ask that you consider completing it to let us know your thoughts. Your input is important because it directly goes toward improving future webcasts. So I hope you take the time to fill out the survey. If you don't see the evaluation survey on your screen, please make sure your pop-up blockers are turned off. All right, let's dig into some questions here. Angela, I wanted to start with a topic that you mentioned in your presentation about laundry. Can flame-resistant chemicals or properties be washed out even if you're following the label directions?
Thanks, Kyle. No, actually, if you follow the proper manufacturer's suggested laundering details, the product does not lose its FR or AR capabilities. That integrity of the fabric is instilled in that product, so it will not wash out.
Okay, great. You just mentioned a little bit about fit. Could you talk a little bit more about how an FR garment should fit?
Sure. Again, you want to make sure that they are loose fitting so that it's not tight to your skin, because if you do happen to catch on fire and it's tight to your skin, that means that your skin is going to burn. Whereas if there is air gaps between your body and the apparel, hopefully that flame will stay against that apparel and not on your body. So again, making sure that it is loose enough, but not too loose, again, so that you don't come up against something and get caught in some type of a machinery. So, you have to kind of look at it on a case-by-case individual scenario so that you can make sure that the fit is right for each individual. So, it's definitely, FR and AR apparel are very costly items, so it's always important to make sure that you have your employees try on the product to make sure the fit is right, the sizing is right to that particular person. You don't want to order something that's not going to fit and have to reorder it. So it's always very important to fit your employees in the actual garments that you're going to be selecting. It's often hard to go into, a size that you may purchase from a retailer, because not all manufacturers manufacture their products accordingly. Just like when you go into a store, when you purchase a jean, if you purchase a jean from store A, it may have a different fit than store B. So again, I think it's very important for you to make sure that when you are fitting your team that you use the correct garments. Don't just simply take the word of your employees that, hey, I'm in a 36 pant or I'm in an extra large shirt. You definitely want to make sure that your employees are trying on the actual garment for size.
Now, is the risk with if you don't do that, is the risk because the employee may choose to wear the garment then improperly, like rolling up the sleeves or buttoning certain buttons, or is the risk that because it's not fitted properly, it may not work properly, or is it a little bit of both?
No, the garment, well, it's a little bit of both. I mean, you don't want it to be too tight because then you could get excess burns. But you want it to be tight enough so that you are getting the protection you need. I think the biggest thing probably is you don't want your employer to invest the amount of money that FR and AR apparel costs. So again, you just want to make sure from a standpoint of, even cost, to make sure that, you don't have to return a product because sometimes it may not be returnable. So just making sure that, everyone knows how that manufacturer's sizing adds up to your particular body type.
Okay. You talked
so
a little bit about
it's cost and fit.
Okay, good. You talked a little bit about layering. Is there any kind of recommendation for what should be worn underneath FR clothing? I mean, do you have to have FR clothing from the outer layer all the way to the skin, or can you really do different types of fabric underneath the FR clothing?
Yep. So I think, with some of the changes that we're seeing with 1910, I think it's probably more important nowadays to wear FR base layer. And the reason why I say that is because of all the new changes. For instance, you have to make sure that you don't roll up your sleeves. You have to make sure that your coverall is zipped up to the top, to the neck, and even a button-up would have to be buttoned to the top. And, sometimes I don't know how comfortable that might be when in a work environment. So, to be able to open up your shirt or zip down your coverall a little, it may be more comfortable for your employees to be wearing base layer FR. Of course, cotton, any natural fiber is okay, but I think for that added comfort and protection, having base layer is to your advantage.
Is there any type of fabric that you would advise folks to avoid if they're wearing underneath their FR? Absolutely.
No longer are man-made fibers acceptable, and man-made being a polyester, a nylon. Those can melt and melt into the skin, if you're in a fire. So you definitely need to make sure that you avoid that type of apparel underneath. Again, my recommendation would be to use an FR base layer.
Yeah.
Or mid layer.
And if you're not going to use FR base, go with a natural fiber.
Correct. Yep. 100% cotton, 100% silk, 100% wool. Anything 100% would be fine.
Okay. Now, we have a question here, and I think we may have addressed this already, but I want to make sure to get it out here for our listener. If an FR shirt has 3 buttons on the top of the shirt, can they be unbuttoned at all? I know you mentioned during your presentation not to unbutton, that you have to be buttoned all the way up, but does it really just kind of depend on what is underneath that FR shirt?
Yep,
as to whether or not they can unbutton it? Okay.
Correct. So if it's 100% cotton underneath your shirt, then all 3 buttons have to be buttoned up. So for a woven work shirt that has that extra banded collar up against the neck, you would have to button it all the way up to that top button. So again, that's kind of why I am saying for comfort, it may be more beneficial to ensure that your employees are in a FR base layer or mid layer, so they have the ability to be a little bit more relaxed and have that relaxed feel while working and not be buttoned up all the way.
Okay, great. Now, there's a lot of different industries in where FR clothing needs to be worn. If FR gets stained or soaked with some type of product such as oil or petroleum, does this render the FR clothing unusable? Do you need to swap out that FR clothing then when it gets stained, or can you wash it? It
all depends. Obviously, if there are large amounts of chemicals, it may be more beneficial to replace a garment. If there's a little splattering here and there, that is okay. But it's really a judgment call. Better to be safe than sorry. But the apparel can be washed. So you need to make sure that you follow the appropriate guidelines, but you just want to make sure that it's not entirely contaminated. If that is the case, then yes, I would suggest replacing the garment.
Do FR manufacturers typically have any advice on that? I mean, do they include it on the label, or when you purchase some FR clothing, do they typically say anything along the lines about stains or contaminants or things along those lines?
I have never seen that from a labeling standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say no, but that is something to consider. So I will make a note of that. Thank you.
Great. Now, this is a question I've seen as well, and FR, it seems to me, can be used in a couple different variations. It can be used to denote flame resistance or flame retardant. Is there a difference between flame resistant and flame retardant or fire retardant? Do we have to be careful how we use those words then? Yes.
So flame retardant means that it will not catch fire, and that it would be something like, what firemen are in. But flame resistant just means that it resists the flame, and it can get a char mark and burn. It will self-extinguish, but that it's not that heavy, fabric or material that you would see with like a firefighter.
Okay, so it's kind of like my water-resistant watch. It can get wet, but it just can't be soaked in water.
Correct.
Okay, great. Can you certify winter liners or cooling headgear to NFPA 2112?
Not at this point. I do know that they are looking to possibly do that in the near future, but at this point that is not a standard or a regulation. Okay,
great. Are there specific requirements for logoing FR clothing? I know some companies, they may order their clothing and they want to have their logo on it. Do they have to get it? Do they have to ask the garment manufacturer to put it on, or can they put it on afterward? Or are there any other requirements when it comes to logoing on that clothing?
Sure. Logoing can be a little tricky. Depending on the size of the logo, you do not have to use FR thread, depending on the size. It typically is considered like a business size or smaller. That does not have to be have FR thread. However, here at Ergodyne, whenever we logo anything, we do use FR thread. It is not required, but we do it as another safety precaution. Some places may not. So when you are working with the organization of your choosing, it would be very smart to make sure and understand what their process is. Anything bigger than that business card size would have to be logoed using a FR thread, but again, it's not required for smaller designs. But again, here at Ergodyne, we do every logo with FR thread.
Now, is that in NFPA or an OSHA standard regarding the size of the logo and what type of thread to use, or is that just a guideline?
No, I believe it is a standard. I would have to check on that, but I believe it is a standard, yes. Okay.
All right, great. Well, unfortunately, we have run out of time. I apologize. We did get a lot of questions in, and we didn't get a chance to get to all of them. But don't worry, all of today's unanswered questions are going to be forwarded on to Angela. Once again, I hope you take the time to fill out the evaluation survey that you saw on your screen earlier. And with that ends today's Safety and Health Magazine webcast. I'd like to thank Angela, Ergodyne, and everyone who listened in. Thank you, and have a great day.
Great. Thank you.